Star Wars The Grey War, Chapter 17 by Nathan Brown.
17. There was only a month before their deadline and Naman still hadn't heard a word from the Jedi. It was time for him to start planning what his army would do if the Jedi didn't respond. He had no real reason and certainly no desire to attack a defenseless planet. It had only been a threat, an attempt to encourage the Jedi Council. He would, of course, do it if he was forced to. He couldn't make the threat then not follow up on it, but he would prefer not to. If he attacked a planet, the Republic would be certain to get involved. If Republic Army started a war, the Jedi could simply sit back as his bogan was cut down by the overwhelming number of regular soldiers that served in the army of the Republic. The younger Jedi would still be restless and even angrier with the older masters for not getting involved in the war. The Jedi would still split and the entire mission would have been for nothing. Time was running out and he needed to think of another way to get the Jedi to do something. He hadn't thought it would be this hard to get them riled up, especially when it meant saving an entire planet of sentient beings. Their hesitation truly made him think less of the Jedi, an order he'd previously seen as a worthy and respected enemy. Alone, slouching on his wooden throne, he tried desperately to think of something to force the Jedi to act. He considered sending a message to the Senate of the Republic, hoping they would pressure the Jedi into action. This idea was quickly dismissed. If he got the Senate of the Republic into it, then they would end up fighting the army of the Republic and the result would be the same as if he attacked a planet. He'd hoped he could complete this mission by himself, but now he had no choice. He had to contact Darth Cognus and get her advice. He pulled out his holo communicator, certain he was alone, and called her. "Ah, my apprentice," she said, her signature sly smile on her see-through blue face. "I was wondering if maybe you died or abandoned me. It feels like it's been ages." "I'm sorry, Master," Naman apologized quickly. "I just assumed you were extremely busy and I didn't want to bother you." Darth Cognus shook her head and chuckled. "Anyways, my apprentice, why have you broken the silence?" "The Jedi. They haven't responded to our message. Time is running out and we haven't heard a peep." He considered telling his master about Kinsa. He knew she would want to know, but something told him to keep it to himself. "I don't know how to make them respond," he finned his head. Darth Cognus paused for a moment before speaking. "Send it to the Jedi," she said simply. Naman was confused. "I did send it to the Jedi." "No," she corrected him. "You sent it to the Jedi Council. They've already been through a war with the Sith. They aren't the ones threatening to leave and they aren't the people you're targeting with this mission. Send the same message to the Jedi Temple. It will get to the younger, more active members of the Order and they will insist on going to war with or without the Council." Naman mentally kicked himself for not thinking of the obvious solution already. "Thank you, Master," he told her, bowing his head and shutting down his communicator. Scene change. Cognus watched as her apprentice's face blinked out of existence. She was certain the Jedi would fight even without this extra pressure, but she understood Naman's worry. This was his first mission that would have a large, long-lasting effect and she'd expected him to freak out a little. If sending the second video would help calm him down, she saw no harm in it. Scene change. Everything in Kinsa's life had become so much more complicated. She couldn't look back at a specific moment and point to when that had happened. She just knew her entire life felt like a giant, confusing mess. When she had simply been a Jedi, it had been so much cleaner. There had been right and wrong, there had been truth and lies, but now it was all muddled. A part of her wished she could just accept the Jedi tenets, that she could somehow make herself naive enough to believe in their teachings without doubt. It would make it so much easier. The more she learned from Nathiera, the more her straining belief in the Jedi was scraped away. As her belief in the Jedi was being washed away, Kinsa didn't know what to put her belief in. She knew that all that Nathiera preached wasn't right, but now she honestly didn't know what was true. She just wanted to find something solid to stand on, just a rock of truth she could cling to while the turbulent seas of this confusing galaxy swirled around her. Scene change. Everything was perfect. It was all ready. Sat had contacted the Lurians and had them move his body within the Bacta tank into a hidden room in his estate on Corellia. He would draw on his pursuer and confront them there. If things went sour, he would simply transfer his essence into the blank clone of himself as he had done many times before. Scene change. This was one of the only moments she'd had alone since getting here. Kinsa knew she had to make this quick. Even when she was in her room, the wallpaper-thin walls between her and the rest of her troop would have given her away. During the day, She felt as if there was always someone watching her, always looking over her shoulder, doubting her story. She brought up her communicator and called the council. She didn't have the way to see all of them, but she would be able to hear all of them. Kinza, Kinza, Master Sifu yelled. Shh, she told him. She felt strange shushing the Jedi Master, but she couldn't be discovered. Oh, I'm sorry, he whispered. Kinza, Master Liftling interrupted, whispering harshly. What do you have to report? The memory of crushing darkness and her terrifying storm of electricity flashed into her mind. She considered telling them about the situation, about her growing confusion, but decided against it. That was a private matter. She would probably talk about it with Master Sifu later, but for now she saw no reason to worry the council with things that didn't affect her mission. They are significantly more organized and cohesive than expected. Their leader is Rogan, as I suspected, and he has brought them all willingly under his leadership. There is no chance to get them to turn on him or each other as we had hoped. Despite this, they are not extremely well trained, at least not compared to the Jedi, and some of them have only the faintest trace of the Force within them. If we prepared, drew up battle plans, and chose a strategic planet, they wouldn't stand a chance. I suggest you inform the rest of the Jedi of the message, draw up a battle plan, and send a response back to Rogan. Well, that's no longer a problem, a master whose voice she didn't recognize said offhandedly. Yes, Master Liftling said, overpronouncing the word angrily. The Bogan sent the message to the rest of the Jedi, so now they all know. The planning has already begun, and it will continue on, with or without us. The war is going to take place on Quill, the third moon of PH-End. Kinza remembered the name of the moon from Jedi history. PH-End and its 3 moons were devoid of almost all vegetation, covered with rocky mountains and dry plains. The only habited area was Quill, the smallest moon that had been colonized by a group of hardy humans from a nearby system. They lived and thrived there against all odds until, one year, a terrible plague had struck, infecting almost 90% of the settlers. They had called out to the Jedi, begging for their help. The Jedi had sent a handful of masters who meditated for a week straight in order to complete the Jedi healing ritual. In the end, almost all of the human settlers had survived, but they had been forced to leave the planet. It turned out the soil was extremely poisonous and they had caught the disease from the food they had grown and eaten there. Quill was a very smart choice for the Jedi. It was surrounded all around by uninhabited planets, so there would be no chance of collateral damage. No collateral damage meant no backlash from the Republic, something the Jedi could certainly do without during this turbulent time. This also meant that, rather than spending resources and energy protecting civilians like they'd had to do on Rusin, the Jedi could focus completely on fighting the Bogan. As a bonus, the planet was drenched in the light side as a result of the Jedi Master's healing ritual. It is a stony, barren, empty planet. Our war will have none of the negative effects Rusin had. Kinza smiled as Master Liftling continued describing the planet. She thought of telling her she already knew of it, but figured it would be easier to just let her talk. We will be leaving behind the initiate and the youngest of the Padawans along with 3 instructors to watch over them. All other Padawans, knights and masters are being shipped to Quillay as we speak. We were just waiting for your call to send our response to the Bogan. Master Sifu said once Master Liftling finished describing the planet. Kinza was pleasantly surprised. She'd never imagined the Jedi would act so quickly or decisively. Kinza, you're certain we can defeat them? Master Sifu asked solemnly. Yes, Master, she replied without hesitation. We have greater numbers, better training, and we will be more entrenched and prepared since the Jedi are heading there now. Thank you for your service, Master Liftling told her. You've done much for the Jedi. When the Bogan lands, sneak away and join us. We will need you when the fighting starts. It was strange to hear something encouraging coming from Master Liftling. She nodded before remembering they couldn't see her. Yes, Masters, I will do my best. May the Force be with you. And you. A chorus of voices came from her communicator. Kinza clicked it off and she was once again by herself in her world of darkness. She sat alone and thought for a moment. She was happy the Jedi were doing something and that the mission was ending, but a part of her was disappointed. Even though it perhaps wasn't good for her, she was learning so much more about the Force here. The Council forbade the use of such dark side abilities, but she knew that many Jedi from the last war used such weapons to defeat the Sith. If she could just learn a bit more, she could keep herself distanced from the darkness while using THE's methods to make her stronger. She knew she was skirting a dangerous line, but if she could control it, she would be able to do so much more good for the galaxy. Scene change. Finally, Cognews had found what she believed to be the resting place of Set Harth. It was a ridiculously gigantic house with shining white, curved walls that reminded her of Bith architecture. It was in a solitary little corner of Corellia, a rich and lush court planet. There wasn't another house in sight. She snuck slowly towards the mansion, keeping her senses open for guards or some sort of alarm system. She assumed a man like Set would have heavy security. A few minutes later, she found herself up against the wall of the house, poised to jump into an open window. She was continually surprised at the lack of security. She grew wary of some sort of trap. She bent low and gathered a small amount of force. Jumping up and force pushing off the ground, she easily sailed up to the window and reached out, pulling herself through. She landed on the shiny black stone floor without a sound and looked up to see Set Harth standing before her. He was clothed in shining silver armor with a bright red emblem on his chest that she didn't recognize. He had a large red cape that touched the floor and he was bowing before her. Darth Cognews had her lightsabers in hand. One pressed onto Set's outstretched neck almost instantly. "Ah, lady. I've long looked forward to the day we got to meet again. I'm elated to say you have not disappointed." Cognews gritted her teeth with frustration. It would be so easy to cut him down now, to put an end to this fool. But his attitude and lack of fear interested her. Curiosity stayed her hand. "You, on the other hand, have been extremely disappointing, Set Harth," she told him, playing along and putting her lightsabers back in her cloak. "I expected you to advance ever so slightly in these past years, but, if anything, you seem to have devolved since our last encounter." Set raised his head and flashed her a smile. "You have me at a disadvantage, my mysterious stalker. You know my name, but I never had the chance to learn yours." As he spoke, Cognews saw something strange in his face. She'd expected him to age in the last 15 years, but he looked somehow younger than she remembered. It surprised her for a moment, but she recovered quickly. There were many ways a Force user could make themselves look younger or mask the effects of the age and the deteriorating work of the dark side. Set Harth was just the sort of person who would waste time and energy learning and applying such foolish tricks. "Darth Cognews," she replied dryly. She saw a gleam of humor in Set's eyes, signifying he had both seen and enjoyed her surprise at his youthful appearance. "Where is it? Darth Scourge's holocron?" she demanded of him, growing tired of his attitude. "Well, I tell you that and off comes my head. And he rubbed his smooth, youthful face, "have quite an attachment to my head. If you don't tell me, I'll simply cut your head off and search this ridiculous house up and down until I find it." Cognews' anger grew as Set shook his head and chuckled mockingly, as if she had just said something unbelievably stupid. Everything about this man infuriated her. "I don't have it here, of course. I wouldn't simply wait here and let you find me and keep my most important artifacts nearby. It's on one of the many planets you chased me across, and, if you kill me now, you'll have no way to get it. I could, of course, tell you where the holocron is in exchange for you leaving me alone. And I know, what's to stop you from torturing the information from me." Well, Cognews grew weary of this man's foolish talk. He clearly had no way out and was now just rambling nonsensically, trying to buy time. She decided suddenly that no holocron was worth this. Her hand flashed into her robe and she brought out her lightsaber, igniting it and slashing at him. The lightsaber easily passed through his fancy breastplate and cut a deep furrow into Set's chest before he could defend himself. She expected him to cry out in surprise and pain before he died, but instead, he remained silent. He looked down at the blackened line across his chest with a look of simple curiosity. He closed his eyes and dropped to his knees, his face disappointingly still showing no pain. He seemed to concentrate for a moment before he wobbled and dropped onto his back. As she watched the life drain from the man sprawled on the black stone floor, she felt no regrets, only disappointment at the peaceful death. She may not have got what she came for, but she'd gotten what she needed. She'd proved to herself that she was still her own master, and she'd done what she wanted ever since she was forced to let Set escape from Doohan. She turned away from the dead man and jumped back out the window. Set had told her he kept nothing of value in the house and she believed him. While he may have been a prancing fool, he hadn't been an idiot. All she would find here is useless talismans used by the weak and pathetic. Scene change. By the time Set awoke in his new body, sunlight was beaming through the green liquid in the bacta tank. He'd never attempted essence transfer over such a large distance before. His plan had been to move the conversation closer to this room, but the Sith woman had lost patience with him much sooner than he'd been expecting. It was a little insulting. It had been a painful death, and the act of transferring his essence was always unpleasant, but it was worth it. Now Darth Cognus would have no reason to try and track him down, and he could go on carving out his little corner of the galaxy. Besides, he thought he'd seen some wrinkles the last time he'd looked in the mirror. Scene change. RTH Millennial felt at home in this cool, dark pit. If he didn't have such a monumental responsibility to the galaxy and to the Force herself, he could see himself spending the rest of his days in a cavern like this. He was kilometers beneath the surface, surrounded by silence broken only by the steady dripping of stalactites. The light from his glow stick only illuminated the area less than a meter around him. The light seemed to be swallowed up by the thick, oppressive darkness around him. As he walked, he daydreamed about it, staying alone in this cavern forever. No responsibilities, no hopes riding on his back, no evil followers bent on destroying him, just the infinite and beautiful expanses within his mind. He could spend years upon years, delving into himself with nothing and no one to stop him. But it could never be. He was chosen, he had a responsibility, and sometimes he had to abandon his desires for the greater good. And so he continued on, searching for the tool that would grant him control over his rebellious cult once again, the Mask of Darth Sanders. Darth Millennial had read about this ancient Sith who had taken down a blasphemous cult within one of the old Sith empires, killing his master who had been the leader of this insurgency. A few more minutes of exploring the dark catacombs beneath Balmoria and he came upon the tomb. It was a large box, just over a meter high and 2 meters long, made entirely of a black stone material. It was beautiful. If the Orc ever allowed him to die, Darth Millennial wouldn't mind being buried in a tomb such as this. He used the Force to lift the heavy slab off the tomb and flung it to the side, cracking it against the wall to the left. He looked down into the tomb to see a stark white skeleton clothed in tattered blue robes. On the skeleton's face was a pristine, shining white mask. The white metal was somewhat reflective, and there were small jagged outlines, making it shine all over with the green light from his glow rod. There were thin, vertical slits along the mouth but no holes in the eyes. There was no shame or hesitation in his heart as Darth Millennial reached down to rip the mask from the man's dry skull. To him, this was how it should be. He was a Sith and it was his right to have all the resources, information and greatness of those who had come before him. He was certain Darth Sanders would be pleased with this, that a true Sith was using this tool he had left behind to crush a group of rebellious followers so he could rise to his rightful place. He grabbed the mask. His fingers tingled as the Force pulsed from the cool metal into his hands. The mask seemed almost to resist his pull for a moment, clinging to its previous owner before it separated from the man's smiling face. He brought it up and placed it on his own face. It seemed to change form slightly to fit perfectly on his features. He felt the Force coursing through him like a charge that boiled his blood, making him shock with a sudden surge of the energy as it flooded into him. The shocking infusion of strength made him feel as if he could do anything, that he could control everything. Without a doubt, he now had enough power to bring his wandering herd back into his grasp.